But it's my job now to present President Mahama. His Excellency John Dramani Mahama holds a Bachelor's of Arts from the University of Ghana, where he studied history. He also completed postgraduate work at the University of Ghana in the field of communications and at the Institute of Social Studies in Moscow in social psychology. He considers these three areas of study, history, communications, and social psychology, influential in shaping his thinking and approach as a man and as a leader. Over the course of his career, he has written for several newspapers and other publications, and recently published his first book, My First Coup d'etat and Other True Stories from the Lost Decades of Africa. This is an extraordinary book, a great literary achievement, particularly from someone whose career was ahead of him as he wrote it. As James Macaulay wrote in the Washington Post, in a collection of remarkable vignettes that blend a historian's sensibility with a novelist's prose, Mahama captures the evolution of that consciousness and with it, glimpses of a nation's recovered soul. Prior to serving as president, President Mahama served in government as a member of the Ghanaian Parliament, Deputy Minister of Communications, First Chairman of the National Communications Authority, Minority Spokesman for Communications, Minority Spokesman for Foreign Affairs, Member of the Pan-African Parliament, and Vice President. He has been President of his country since July 2012. Please join me in welcoming His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, President of the Republic of Ghana.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I am here today because of the power of the word. Indeed, more accurately, because of the power of many words. I'm here today because more than 40 years ago, I picked up a book titled Things Fall Apart. Reading that book, as I have many times, was like a rite of passage for me. It changed the way I saw myself and the world around me. Or perhaps a better way to put it is that it changed the way I felt about myself and the world around me. All the books that I had previously read were peopled with foreigners, people who did not look like me, did not talk like me, did not have names that were familiar, recognizable, or at times even pronounceable. And still their stories mattered, because through them I discovered a shared humanity. But what an eye-opening experience it was to share in the humanity of a people and a culture with which I was familiar, to realize that those stories, our stories, mattered as well. Storytelling has to do with power. Professor Chinua Achebe is famously quoted as saying, "If you do not like someone's story, write your own." Once I discovered the works of Professor Achebe and other African writers, it was the love of their stories that inspired me to not only want to write my own, but to even dare imagine that I could. I'm here today because I eventually did write my own book, and I asked that it be sent to Professor Achebe, my literary hero, in the hopes that he might open the envelope, glance at my name on the title page, and at least learn of my existence before tossing the manuscript onto some pile of never-to-be-read documents on his desk or worse still, into the rubbish bin. Thankfully, Professor Achebe was gracious enough to not only read my entire manuscript, but to also offer some of the most encouraging words any new writer could ever hope to hear from anyone, let alone his mentor. I'd always wanted to meet Professor Achebe, this man with whom I had had a one-sided relationship for over 4 decades. I wanted to have a conversation with him, and it looked as though fate would finally grant me that opportunity when I was invited to participate in his colloquium on Africa last December. Unfortunately, John Dramani Mahama, the writer, had to decline the invitation because John Dramani Mahama, the politician, had a previous engagement. It coincided with election day in Ghana. And I was on the ballot. And in case you haven't heard, I won. When an advance invitation was extended to me for participation in an Achebe event this December, I gave my word that I would definitely be there. How could I have known that Professor Achebe would not? I'm here today because of another mentor of mine, Nelson Mandela, who has also passed on to become an ancestor, and tomorrow the world will openly mourn his loss as one family and formally honor his memory. I thank all of you for making it possible for me to be able to keep my promise to Professor Achebe and his family, and to also travel to South Africa to express my gratitude to Madiba, a man who lost 27 years of his life in order to keep a promise he had made to one day gain true freedom or to die fighting for it. Though my chance to meet Professor Achebe had come and gone, I took tremendous comfort in the knowledge that we had indeed had our conversation. For 40 years, he had been sharing with me his stories. And fate did, as it turns out, give me the opportunity to return the gesture by way of my manuscript and share with him a few of my stories as well. Last but certainly not the least, I'm also here today because of another promise, one that I made to a girl I don't know and would probably not recognize if she passed me on the street. If fate had been even kinder to me than it already has been, and granted me that opportunity for a face-to-face conversation with Professor Achebe, it is her story that I would have shared with him. So please indulge me as I share with you another story that changed the way that I felt about myself and the world around me. I was watching a UNICEF program featuring various country reports on the status of children and young people. In each report, a young person from that country spoke about what most concerns them in their communities. There were the obvious responses that one would expect from young people in developing countries. They were concerned about poverty, about their ability to finish school, and upon matriculation, their ability to find employment. When the country report from Ghana came on, I paid extra close attention because as a relatively new member of parliament, I thought it might offer additional insight. The young person interviewed was a girl, about 12 years of age. She was just on the cusp of puberty. Her tiny braids and high voice still belonged to the child that would no longer be, while her lanky body and angular features offered a glimpse of the young woman she was in the process of becoming. Every night I pray to God, the girl said, that the men will leave me alone so I can go to school and grow up. I don't want them to touch me in the way they do with my mates and other girls I know. What? I exclaimed aloud. Did I really hear what I thought I'd heard? Indeed, I was speechless. And then I became annoyed. I ranted silently about how the Western world was always conspiring to try to cast Africa in such a horrible light. How dare those UNICEF people come to Ghana, and of all the young girls they probably interviewed, use the one whose comment would place the country in the West light. I think deep down, though, I was not yet prepared to admit it. I knew that what I'd heard was indeed this girl's truth. I think deep down, I knew it was the truth for a lot of young girls, not only in Ghana, but across the continent. In those days, Ghana did not have the kind of free media it has today, and so there were a lot of ugly truths about our society that were only known and discussed behind the closed doors of shame. But in the weeks, months, and years that followed the broadcast of that UNICEF program, I developed an awareness, one that I had never had before. It was as though I started seeing things to which I'd been blind my entire adult life. Like many other African men, I had paid a tremendous amount of lip service to the strength, resilience, and beauty of the African woman, that mythical mother who expertly raises her children and adeptly runs her household, and ages into the mystical grandmother who talks in aphorisms and tells Kwekwa Nancy folk tales by the firelight. Suddenly now, I saw a vulnerability that I never knew existed before. I saw the gross inequalities, financial and otherwise. And I made a silent promise to that young girl, whose words had opened my eyes, that I would use whatever influence I could as a politician, as a husband, as a father, as an ordinary citizen, to ensure that other girl children are able to live their lives without an ever-present fear of sexual abuse. This decade from 2010 to 2020 has been declared by the African Union to be the decade of African women. What exactly that means, I do not know, but I know what it should mean. If Africa is, in fact, going to focus on its development, we cannot afford to neglect the over 50% of our population who are women. We, the leaders of our communities, the writers, the politicians, the artists, the thinkers, the visionaries, need to start addressing head-on the issues that are facing the girls and women in our lives and in our nation. Issues like rape as an act of war, child marriages, humiliating widowhood rights, genital mutilation, inequitable property rights, high maternal mortality rates, and gender-based violence. We, the leaders of our communities, need to start telling the truth. And one of the first lessons that I learned from Professor Achebe is that it is possible to speak with both truth and love about one's country. That is, in fact, one of the surest roads we can take towards change. So I can think of no better time or place than now at the inaugural Chinua Achebe Leadership Forum to open such a discussion, one that I hope will continue and will ultimately transform our continent. I thank all of you for your time and for being here with me today. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce James H. Ottaway Jr., Life Trustee of Bard College.
Thank you. Your Excellency, as Life Trustee of Bard College, I want to thank you for this stirring speech, for this fearless telling of the truth, for this teaching moment in which you have shown the students in this room how important it is to read just one book that can change your life. That is a great gift today. We want to give you a gift that you can put into your airplane seat next to you, which is a Bard chair. But in case this doesn't fit into your suitcase, we have a Bard pen, which you can use to write back home and tell everyone what a wonderful place this is and what a good time we had with you here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I also have a program for President Goldstein. Yeah.
Can I ask the members of the roundtable discussion to come to the stage, please?
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this roundtable discussion. Roundtable discussion on the role of women in the development and democratization of Africa. On this roundtable, we have the honor of having a number of very distinguished guests. We have His Excellency President Mahama, President of Ghana, and obviously he needs no introduction. We have Honorable Nana Oye Lither, who is a Ghanaian barrister and politician. She received her master's in law in human rights and democratization from the University of Pretoria, South Africa. A human rights advocate, she is the current Minister for Gender, Children, and Social Protection in Ghana. At our very, left, we have a native of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Amini Kajunju is the first African to serve at the realm of the African American Institute, AAI. AAI is an international organization dedicated to advancing education and professional training for Africans and promoting engagement between Africa and America through education, training, and dialogue. At the very extreme right, we have Professor Peter Rosenbaum, who is Professor of International Law and Human Rights at Bard College. His recent projects include field research on obligations and oversight of mining in South Africa and Peru and on tea plantations in India. He has served as consultant for projects in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Kashmir, Côte d'Ivoire, Chad, Sao Tome and Principe, Vietnam, Rwanda, and Peru. What we're going to do, how I've decided to organize this roundtable, is to give each presenter a few minutes to talk. And would you like to start? Okay. I will start with Her Honorable Minister, Nana Oye Lither, who is going to be talking in general, in broad terms, about women's rights in Africa. Okay.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to you all. As I was coming here, I was on the flight, I flipped through the latest edition of The Economist, and I was struck by a picture on one of the pages. It was a picture of a lady called Beth Wangari. Beth is a Kenyan female farmer, a crop farmer, and she is one of the millions across the globe. I would consider her as your typical African woman. I'll also like to share with you the story of my paternal grandmother, whom until 3 years ago I didn't know was a political activist. She belonged to Kwame Nkrumah's party, the CPP, and she led women to feed Dr. Kwame Nkrumah whilst he was in Ashford prison. He had been imprisoned by the colonial powers. She was an illiterate female political activist. So for me, these are your two typical African women. They represent 2/3 of the globe's illiterate adult population. Their children, as African women, may be one of the 9 infants who will die from infant-related diseases. Their daughters may also be one of the 61% of young women across the world who lack basic reading and learning skills. But the fortunes of Africa is changing, and with it, the fortunes of the African woman. The United Nations Millennium Development Goals report of 2012 attests to this. First, we are achieving universal primary education. Our rates have also increased for female representation in our parliament. In the year 2000, women represented 13% of African women in parliaments. Now we are 21% in 2012. Globally, maternal mortality is reducing, and it is also reducing in Africa. We have been able to cut maternal mortality by 2/3. This is welcome. But then, what does this mean for us as African women? How would it influence greater decision-making within the households, greater political space in African governments, and then having more women in our corporate boardrooms, leaving the farms like birth and getting into the boardrooms? How will it reduce harmful traditional practices and also reduce gender-based violence? These are the issues and questions I ask myself. So as Africa is the fastest growing economy, where we have our GDP increasing by 5.5% in 2014, I ask myself, will we as African women play a pivotal role in this economic progression? How will our lives change as African women? This is what I hope we will discuss. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. We will segue to Ms. Amini Kajuju, who is going to be talking about harnessing the potential of all Africans to boost Africans' development.
Thank you. Good evening. It's with great pleasure that I am here to speak to you and also to be in the presence of such great men and women who are working very hard to move the African continent forward. As a person from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the news coming out of my country is things like on CNN a couple years ago, Anderson Cooper said that Congo was the rape capital of the world. And hearing such comment just pierced into my heart and hurt me so badly. I took a very emotional stance to such a statement because the Congo that I've always known did not represent a place of rape and violence. But this is what the world has been hearing and seeing about Congo, and therefore it's a place that is not safe for women. But when I've traveled throughout Congo, particularly where my parents are from, Goma and Bukavu, I see the other side of the story. I see women like my aunts and my grandmother who on a daily basis work very hard to uphold their dignity and to do the things that they think is important to them, like taking care of their family, taking care of their farms, earning some kind of an income so that they can contribute to the well-being of their families. These are not the stories that you will hear on CNN or any other news media in the United States. And when I think of my own personal story, I was raised by, I like to say, a feminist father, a man who believed that men and women should get equal education. Men and women should have access to the halls of government and banks and business. Men and women are capable of being anything they wanted to be. He said to me, Amini, the eldest daughter, that you can become whatever you want to become. You can be a leader if that's what you choose to do. You can be an engineer if that's what you choose to do. You can be an actress. I used to like to sing and dance as a child. You can go on Broadway if that's what you want to do. You can do anything you want. And I dare say that there are many African parents that are like this. But indeed, there are lots of challenges on the African continent when it comes to gender issues. And for me, what I've seen as part of the solution is education. We must provide education to every child on the African continent and give him or her the opportunity to become whatever they want to become. We must also raise our sons and daughters differently. We must tell our sons that women are more than just people who can have children for you. We must tell our sons that women are more than your partners at home, but they can be partners in business, in government, in society. We must tell our women, our girls, that they shouldn't be afraid to stand up. They shouldn't be afraid to be unique. They shouldn't be afraid to have a voice. And I hope that in our discussion today, we will have a robust and truthful conversation about how harnessing the potential of both men and women will move the African continent forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And last but not least, Professor Peter Rosenblum will be talking about the challenges of democratic accountability, Ghana's promising recent history, and its future as an oil state.
So thank you very much, and I hope you'll permit me to say a few words first as an outsider and a great admirer of Ghana. And to tell just a short, quick story that when I learned that the president was coming, I thought, oh, I'm going to write to one of my old students and ask him for some advice about what I should ask the president. And I'd lost touch with the student just during the last couple of years. So I wrote to Raymond, and I got back the response. He was one of the first students in my first class of teaching at Harvard Law School. And I got back the out-of-office response that said that the executive secretary to the president wouldn't respond to my email right away. So it turns out that Raymond Atuguba has become, is working with the president. Unfortunately, I think he's not yet here in the audience tonight. But I have to say what a thrill I had realizing that, that this was where Raymond was, that both he was appreciated now in this role, and that the president appreciated him. And I know what kind of person this is. Not only that he was a human rights student in my human rights class at Harvard Law School, but he came there having been a human rights activist in grassroots work of the new era of economic and social rights in the urban area of Accra, of working with women in the current struggles to find ways to get access to water, to come out of poverty, to think about human rights not only in the terms that we've been hearing and that we should think about it as the abuses of women, the abuses of men, and by repressive governments, as Ghana is known in the past, but the new directions in which government had to play an active role in enabling women and men to emerge from poverty and to be able to take advantage of the new opportunities. And I was really quite thrilled, and I thought, well, there's really no questions I could ask. Because I know that somebody close to the President's ear is asking those questions and giving the advice. But for the sake of the audience, I thought a few words about Ghana and why we could be so hopeful should still be said. That in my view, very biased judgment, Ghana has come faster and further than any country in Africa. It's captured in many of the numbers. Look at the number of peaceful democratic handovers of elected power in the country. Look at the economic growth. Look at the free press and free speech and the strength of institutions that have been growing. And it's perhaps because Ghana had so much promise at independence, and yet the disruptions of that promise were so profound that our hope today, again, is so high. As I was coming of age as a young lawyer in the 1980s, the great intellectuals and activists of Ghana were in full flight from the country, benefiting every other country in the world except Ghana. We had Ghanaian teachers. Everyone had Ghanaian teachers, and the lawyers and the rest, as they fled the country because of the near total collapse of the economy and the repressive rule in the country. In my first year as a lawyer, I had to call Ghana. At that time, there were 4 calls allowed per hour. There was one operator who arranged those calls. They were scheduled 24 hours in advance. To be able to reach the country, to communicate, felt as if you were traveling through centuries in order to talk to anyone there. And this was the story of Ghana in the 1980s, the story of the hopes dashed, a sense the repression and the economic collapse. And so much has changed, and that's what we see before us. But I think for us, the students, and for the audience, we really have to pause to remember that the very fact of having this eloquent and modest and funny man as president of the country is something that could not have been imagined 25 years ago, and is really a product of this tremendous change, and one in which Ghana has really been a leader among African states. There are others who are also doing okay, but the story of Ghana is a very particular story, made even more particular when you look at the neighborhood that it's operating in, a neighborhood where repression and dictatorship and civil war are still threatening the opportunities of those institutions. So Ghana has had this possibility, and it's been exercising it in such a powerful and an exciting way. And it's been building the institutions. As I look at it and I think about it, I think how I wonder about what has made it possible and what will make it possible to continue. One of the things that I think, again, we in the audience, we outside the country are not aware of is that recently Ghana has become one of the oil states of Africa. And I think to myself, thank God, and thank God it didn't happen earlier. Look again at the neighborhood that Ghana's in and who the other oil states are: Nigeria, Angola, Equatorial Guinea, and a few others like Cameroon or Congo-Brazzaville or others, none of which could compete in terms of the institutions. And we thought when we learned that Ghana had discovered oil, well, if there's one country in Africa that can do it, perhaps it's Ghana at this moment. Perhaps because it's been able to move on in terms of thinking about human rights and accountability to the building of institutions, to the thinking about transparency and accountability across the board. And after struggles in Ghana, a petroleum management law was adopted just before the president was elected, and a committee was set up to oversee the money and also to look at how it connects with development. And I would love an opportunity to hear from the president reflecting on that. And I had permission from Raymond. I said, I'm going to bring up oil. And he said, absolutely, it's the issue that we struggle with. How do we use the new resources? How do we make sure that they're accountable for the kind of development that we now recognize has to be there? Among other things, the development that reaches the subsistence farmers, the disproportionate number of whom are women. and who still depend on the land, and where the developments that are otherwise visible on paper, the high rate of development, are likely to escape them. So I will just put that out there. I mean, it's a snapshot of admiration and appreciation and a recognition that Ghana now faces the challenges that, frankly, no other country in Africa has managed to meet. That with all of the other countries where this challenge has been faced, there are bits and pieces of an effort to do well by them. Ghana seems to be in the best position. I hope the President can address a bit about how you see that and how you face that in light of the neighborhood you're in and the progress that Ghana has made.
Thank you very much. Do you want to respond, or should we?
Yeah, thank you very much. And indeed, the average age of leaders in Africa is normally much, older than I am, and so I keep my gray hair so that I can fit the part. But let me say, a lot of people ask me, what's the secret to Ghana's stability and democracy? And I say it's because, like he said, in the 80s we, fell into the pits, and when you get to the rock bottom, there's no further down you can go. All you can do is start to climb up again. And so that's the secret. We couldn't go any further down, and so we started to climb out. And after where we had been, all the stakeholders for political power in Ghana, accept that we never want to be where we were again. And so we swear allegiance to the Constitution. We think that democracy and constitutional governance is the way to go, and all the political players on the arena accept that. And so we're willing to wait our turn every 4 years, make a go at the election. If you win, you take the mandate and you govern the country. So I think that is part of what's happening. But coming to the role of women, as you said, in the past, I think things have moved along and things are much better now. But in the past, when there was a scarcity of resources as to which child to put in school, often the boy was favored, and the girl child was seen as just good enough to be in the kitchen and learn how to cook and be married away. Increasingly, that is changing. More girls are going to school as boys are. We've achieved gender parity in terms of enrollment of boys and girls. But there are still major, inhibitions that women face, and we need to face up to them and try and correct them so that women can recognize their full potential. It just makes common sense. Women constitute more than half our population. There's no way you can keep half of your population down and think that you can move, at an optimum pace as a country. If women were allowed to reach their full potential, it will make Ghana and Africa much the better for it. And so there are many things that affect women in rural areas, in urban settings, where there's not sufficient water. It's the duty of the girl child when she wakes up to go with her mother to go look for water. The boy child sleeps a bit more, wakes up and asks, where's my water to bath? And then he and his dad go and have a bath, and then he goes off to school. The girl has to wake up and do all the chores together with her mother and all that. And there are several other such issues. Gender violence, we need to face up to it. Women do as much of the work, indeed more work on the farm, the family farm, than men do. The men do the plowing, yes, and the women do all the sowing, the threshing, the conveying of the produce from the farm to the house, and all that is done by the women. They raise the children, they market the produce, and do much of the work that is done in an average African family. If you bring it in the modern context, women are making progress. In Ghana, women occupy almost all the positions. She is Minister for Gender and Children. The Attorney General and Minister of Justice is a woman. The Minister of Foreign Affairs is a woman. The Minister of Transport is a woman. Minister of Tourism is a woman. The Chief Justice is a woman, the Controller and Accountant General is a woman, the Director of Prison Service is a woman. I mean, there are so many women who have achieved. But still, we must admit, women have to work 3 times harder than men in any position to be recognized as having done, just as well as a man, So I think that these are all issues we need to bring up, we need to discuss, and I think we would all be the better for it.
Thank you very much, sir. There are a number of questions from the audience, which I will read and throw out, and then we can have a discussion. One person in the audience asks, as Africa and its nations grow and call attention to the world, who do you look to as leaders and creators of the future? Who has your attention?
Can I?
Yes, please.
His Excellency President John Mahama has my attention. He has my attention because he is a transformational leader, and it is not because he's my boss. This is what I see. And one clear example is just what he has said with respect to women's position in governance and his commitment to ensure that there's equitable representation of women in governance, because that is very key in terms of women's rights. So we have 20+% of representation in cabinet, and then across board in other public office positions. Apart from that, as a government, he has looked at the issue of social protection and narrowing the inequality gap. So as a government, we're looking at effective interventions to ensure that poverty is reduced in Ghana, that we're able to target our social interventions at poor persons. We're able to ensure that poor persons receive services. And I'll mention one such effective intervention, which is actually a flagship. We give cash grants to over 73,000 poor households across the country in 99 districts. That's about half of our population, and that affects 232,000 persons. We give an amount of money for their food, their shelter, and their clothing. And for us, this is one clear example of intervening to help poor persons and making sure that as we transition from middle income status to upper income status as a country, we provide a cushion for poor persons. So I would personally look up to my boss and my president. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know a secret. A lot of capable African women are reluctant to go into politics, especially in Ghana. In Ghana, it can be quite tough. If you are a politician or you're an office holder and you survive the political talk shows between 6 and 10, then you will live the rest of the day. And so a lot of women don't want to do it. And so when I asked her to be minister, she was a very famous human rights and women's activist. And so I called her and I said, oh yeah, I want you to be gender and children minister. And she said, no, I couldn't, I won't do it. And I said, I want you to be. She said, no, no, no. And I said, well, you think about it, I'll call you again tomorrow. And then I got her husband to persuade her, and then got all kinds of people to soften her, and eventually she accepted, and she's one fantastic minister. I mean, very capable. And I think that's what makes me think women should get involved. You know, we can't just sit out there and expect, you know, that we don't want to participate in political office, yet we want to be activists, you know, human rights activists and all that. who should go in and implement the policies and make people's lives better. And she's doing that. She's translated from human rights activists to actually implementing issues of human rights, women's rights, gender rights, and all child rights and all of them.
Thank you.
I think that one of the underlying themes that we've heard today, both in His Excellency's wonderful presentation, keynote presentation earlier, and also on this panel, has been the role of education, girl education. And we have a question here. What do you feel that could be done to improve and to promote the education of women in Africa? How do we get to Rwanda's example of 63% piety in the assembly? So, I mean, there are African nations that we can sort of look to, whether it's Rwanda or the example of Liberia or the example of Malawi. How do we get there?
So I think, when you have leadership like in President Mahama and in other presidents that are very concerned about making sure that women have their rightful place in society, in every part of society, I think it starts there. But the other key issue is indeed education. Really being committed to making sure that both boys and girls get the right education to move a country forward. But I have to say that there's a trend that I'm personally slightly worried about as we try to fix this issue of women historically not getting the right education, and that is these girl-only focused educational programs. I get worried about them because I think then we're doing the opposite. We're doing what we're doing to boys what we did to girls, and I don't think that's the right solution. I've seen interventions in which a lot of money is poured into education only for girls, and then you think, well, where are the boys in that same community going to go to school? And if you're talking about impoverished environments where both boys and girls aren't going to school because parents really just don't have the money, and then you come in with an intervention in which you only focus on girls, leaving the boys behind, I don't think that that's the right solution either. I think education has to be inclusive. It has to bring both genders together, because from a very young age, we have to teach each other how to be together. Boys and girls have to learn how to work together, because together they're going to grow the economy, together they're going to be part of government. And when I see examples of what I'm seeing in Ghana, for example, you know that it works. It works. And so excluding the boys to try to save the girls, I don't think is the right way to do it.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to add on a bit. In Ghana, we look at improving and promoting education for girls, but there are some challenges. We discovered that in the public schools, only 48% of the public schools had toilets, operating toilets. So when the girls were in their menses, some of them would stay at home. So it was important for us to make sure that we constructed toilets so that the girls could stay in school for the 4 or 5 days that they bled. Apart from that, we need to also recognize the role that the MDG goals have played, that CEDAW, that is the UN Convention on the Rights of Women, and the African Additional Protocol on the Rights of Women have played. These have all provided international standards, African regional standards that we as states in Africa have adhered to, and then also for the MDGs, a goal that we sought to achieve. And this has helped a lot in terms of ensuring that girls stay in school, and we increase the numbers, especially at the tertiary level. We could have gender parity at the primary level. It increases a bit at the secondary level, but then the girls drop out of school due to teenage pregnancy and child marriages. So these are interventions that we need to keep an eye on, and CEDAW has played a very critical role. Thank you.
One of the issues that Ms. Kajunju mentioned was not separating boys from girls or men from women. And I think that that's extremely important when you're talking about the African women's movement. Whether you want to call it African feminism or what other terms we tend to use to describe that which we are doing in Africa to try to gain parity with men. And I think one of the unifying issues that always comes to play is this idea that you don't remove men from the movement. What is it that we can do to bring in men, to change men's minds about what is going on? Because in fact, what African women are essentially saying is that our movement is more than just, movement for equal pay or taking back the night. It oftentimes, when school fees are raised, it's a woman who has to come up with more money to pay school fees for their children. So how do we involve African men more in our movement? Does anyone want to? How do we bring them in, since they are the ones who...
We ask them.
Yeah.
Come. I mean, really. I mean, I think it's an excellent point. I don't think, the African feminist movement, if you can call it that, in Africa. I mean, I think takes a very different approach to the feminism that you've seen outside of movement outside of Africa. I think we've as a young African woman, you're taught a lot of sort of cultural cues and nuances and how you deal with your elders, how you deal with people in different positions. And I think actually the African woman has skills that maybe other women don't have in being able to navigate some of these challenges. And I think when we are aware of our cultural heritage and the cultural cues that we've been taught, and use it not to stay quiet and to sort of remove ourselves from the conversation, but use it actually to bring ourselves to the conversation and invite the men to say, come and be part of this process. We are raising children together. We are building this nation together. Let's be part of become part of the conversation. I think you have a more robust and better results, really.
Yes, in Ghana we have a term, Sankofa. You go back, and when you look at the African woman, especially our leaders of old, of the colonial period, Asantua, Queen Amina of Nigeria, of Zaria, etc., you find out that we have certain unique features, and the African woman is very powerful. In our current feminist movement, what we've sought to do is to apply the radical feminist theories that you would have to wrest the power. Because in Africa is a patriarchal society, so the man dominates. But we learn from our African female traditional leaders, and we've picked up unique traits that we use to get the men around. So it's a whole mixture. We can become the radical feminists when we need to be. So for instance, in Ghana, when we needed to get a law passed on domestic violence, we had to adopt some of those tactics. And then when we also need to be, we go back and pick up those unique strategies, and we're able to get the men over. So it's a mixture, but we do have to scale up male involvement, especially with respect to gender-based violence. So.
Okay, one more question. How does Ghana, or the rest of Africa, support the development of women-owned businesses? Yes.
Yes. With respect to women-owned businesses, Ghana government basically provides microcredit, depending on the level. So the government of Ghana has a program called MASLOC, and that provides loans. And not only loans, but also provides skills and training for women entrepreneurs. There's also another social protection intervention that is managed by the Ministry of Local Government called LESTEP. And with that, Government of Ghana provides equipment and also training for all sorts of, for hairdressers and for other, not only women, but male entrepreneurs. So we actually have a conscious or a deliberate program under our social protection programs to provide for women. We also have the women banks that provide finance, and also the banking industry provides finance and, for women.
Actually, one thing I wanted to say, when you asked, somebody asked the question, who do you look up to, you know, for inspiration? You know, for me, I look at politicians, because I think it's you know, the leadership of a country, of a state, of a city, the people who are leading it, they're an important source of inspiration, or example of what to do and what not to do. But the other two set of individuals in society that I tend to look up to are entrepreneurs and educators. Entrepreneurs really, when they do their job, and that is create product and services that the market needs, and then also they're able to employ people, when they do an incredible service to a nation, because with entrepreneurs, you're able to create jobs. With jobs, you're able to create wealth, and with wealth, you're able to create prosperity. So entrepreneurs are a very important part of society, and governments have to do everything that they can to make sure that they have all that they need and that they have the enabling environment to grow. The second set of people of society that I think are key are the educators. Educators, as obviously as the word says, educate the populace. And again, we have to provide an enabling environment for educators to thrive so that they can educate the next generation. So for me, when I look for inspiration, I look at politicians, entrepreneurs, and educators.
Thank you very much. Last question. I've been told that our time is up. And let me pose a somewhat difficult, I would assume, question on those topics that we don't like to sort of speak of, which His Excellency mentioned, violence against women, rape. What can we do as a continent to curb, these problems that we have, whether it's violence against women, rape, incest, widowhood, oppression, etc. What can we do as countries in Africa to stem these issues? Are there any particular things that we can do to start to move forward?
First, the key is the law. We must make sure that we have the laws in place, because after all, Africa was the first continent that that came up with a judgment during the tribunal for Rwanda, where rape was recognized in international law as a war crime. That was joined. So we have done a lot as a continent, but we need to pass the laws. Political leadership needs to condemn the act, and each government needs to come up with specific interventions to reduce gender-based violence and indicators to measure how this is done. Because it's a problem. DRC Congo is a problem, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and several other countries. And we believe that this should be taken up by the Africa Union because it is a serious problem, gender-based violence.
Nwando, can I just add a word? I think that that the recommendations and concerns that you've raised are all so important, but I also want us in this audience to reclaim a little bit of the anger that President Mahama first felt when he saw that UNICEF show, and to remember that the perception of Africa as somehow rape-prone is a projection from elsewhere, that Congo is not the capital of rape, and that the countries of Africa are not experiencing, there's no statistic anywhere that will tell us that there's a higher incidence of rape. And so what we're dealing with So while every country should be facing those same recommendations, I just wanted us also to remember as we leave here that this is not an Africa problem, that is different than a Western problem.
Well,
I just go back to the role of men. I think that on a lot of the issues to do with women's empowerment, we have moved faster where men have been brought on board and partnered with women to make a change. And so, for example, in Ghana, a lot of education went into our interstate succession laws that had previously discriminated against women, and the broad movement, recruited a lot of men as advocates. And when the law was passed, it's made things much better. We're coming with a successor law which actually deals with property rights of women to remove all the remaining inequalities. So we need men as partners, and we need to let them understand that women's struggle for empowerment is not meant to disadvantage them, and it's rather meant to complement them and the whole society in order that we can move faster.
Thank you very much. On that note, we will end this particular roundtable.